Welcome back to the YouTube channel for BamaOnLine.com. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BOL, back alongside team expert Jimmy Stein. Coming up in about 20 minutes or so, we'll be joined by senior team writer Charlie Potter. It is a team-centric edition of the program on the YouTube home for BamaOnLine.com on this Wednesday, Jimmy Stein, May the 29th. And you know this as well as anyone. Once we get to the month of June, we just sort of catapult towards the start of another college football season. We've got some of the college football magazines already hitting newsstands. We got SEC spring meetings, kind of a warm up for SEC media days coming up in July. So no shortage of topics, and we'll get to a lot of them on the program today. What we're going to start with first, though, Jimmy, Alabama softball back home in Oklahoma City, just like we figured, right, Jimmy? I mean, when this team was struggling in SEC play, when this team couldn't get a win in the Southeastern Conference tournament. Now, you saw a really good LSU team in that opening game, so there's some understandability, I guess you could call it, to that. But wow, I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by anything that Patrick Murphy does at this point with these teams, but no Montana Fouts, nothing really resembling an offense for multiple months of this season. Yet here they are again, Jimmy, back in the Women's College World Series.
I think so much of it's explained just by championship DNA being a part of the program. And once you're playing for a championship, it's like they spring to life. It reminds me a little bit of Nick Saban, the Saban era, frankly, in terms of who thought that this Alabama team this past year was going to be in the Rose Bowl playing for a national championship in the Final Four of college football, who thought after the South Florida game or after the Texas game that Alabama with Jalen Milroe would defeat Georgia in the SEC championship game. But championship DNA, Nick Saban wills these things to happen, and Patrick Murphy wills these things to happen. He's gone to the World Series in more than 50% of his seasons. That would be like really, really impressive if he'd have been at Alabama for 7 years and made it 4 times. But he's been at Alabama 4 times that long and has still kept up that same pace. He's remarkable, a first ballot Hall of Famer in his sport. And he is as much responsible as anyone getting there, including Caleb Beaver and Jocelyn Brisky, who've been really fantastic all season long. But I think Beaver's performance against Tennessee in Game 2, the 10 shutout innings,
wow,
that is just legendary. She is a legend in her brief time based on that performance alone.
Yeah, we talk about Daniel Moore performances, right? I think that would qualify for one for Caleb Beaver, a second-team All-American, as we know now. And just like you said, Murph, almost after that super regional clinching win up in Knoxville Sunday evening, could have hit you with the old Nick Saban, we were dead and gone. Could have hit you with that. A 9 seed in the SEC tournament, sub 500 in SEC play. So, a couple things can be true, but you also got to remember it's a long season, right?
Right.
Think about back to mid-February. Georgia looked like a lock for the Women's College World Series. LSU started 24-0 to the season, ended up getting shipped out to Stanford, where they dropped a tough 3-game super to the Cardinals. So, again, there can be some disappointment for sure within a season, and it was elongated based on what we're used to seeing from Murph teams at Alabama here in 2024, but it's all about the finish. And right now, the Alabama Crimson Tide back in Oklahoma City. Talk about the win at Tennessee and how it kind of came about. Watching those first couple of games, Alabama in some ways felt fortunate to have it at 1-1, but in other ways, I felt like this series could be over. Alabama could have won this thing in 2 games. Instead, you're going to the rubber game.
That's right. It was extremely competitive all the way through the final inning of the 3rd game. And it was a competitive series in Tuscaloosa. I think so many people forget during the year, it was disappointing that Alabama only won 1 SEC series all year long. And people talk about that. What they didn't talk about was The games were competitive. So many of those games could have gone the other way. What I think about, Travis, is game 3 at Tennessee in that first inning when Riley Valentine hits the grand slam. Well, Alabama was very fortunate that the bases were loaded because Tennessee had hit 2 batters to load the bases. And some people might say, wow, they got so lucky to get on base because that was just, they never would have got on base on their own. Yeah, but this is what they did. They got the big hit with the bases loaded because that had not happened all during the regular season. It felt like Alabama was 0 for 60 with the bases loaded during the regular season. I'm sure that's not true. It just felt like it. They were due for a big hit with the bases loaded. Riley Valentine was due for a big hit.
Have a postseason, Riley Valentine. How about it? You know,
sure did. She was great, especially considering this. To be honest, when she filled in for Marley Giles and playing catcher every day when Marley Giles was out with their injury, it wasn't pretty all the time. We were reminded that Alabama didn't really go sign Riley Valentine to be the starting catcher. She was sort of signed to be the backup catcher and a backup bat, but she had to play every day because Marley was hurt, and it wasn't pretty all the time. And as soon as she was freed up from that everyday role and could kind of pick her spots, well, she came up with some big hits. I was really happy for her because so much of her time as a starter had been a struggle.
Well, we talked about before the Super sustainability of the offense that we had seen in the Tuscaloosa Regional. And the implication there wasn't to think that Alabama would go to Knoxville and score 7, 8, 9 runs a game against that kind of pitching, against that type of opposition, more so situational opportunities. And, Alabama did a nice job of that up in Knoxville. And conversely, Alabama's pitching did a hell of a job in taking care of Tennessee bats, and the defense wasn't always great. I mean, if we're being honest, that game 1 loss felt even more disheartening because of how it unfolded, right? You had a high chop to second base. Looks like you're going to get out of that inning, the 5th, I want to say, in game 1. You don't make the play, and you know what's coming next, right? You know the bomb is coming next. That's exactly what happens. Disheartening, gutting, pick an adjective to describe that loss. And also, again, in those first 2 games, Valentine had a ball go off the top of the wall about a foot short of a home run that would have ended it at that point in game 2. Instead, she's thrown out at second base on a nice play by the Tennessee center fielder. Same thing for Bailey Dowling in game 1. She had a ball go off the wall. You end up getting a runner thrown out at third on a Dowling double. So the point being that they got what they needed. Kristen White, right, with some heroics there in game 2. That's the type of effort it takes. And you have to understand it's not going to be runs and bunches once you get to this point in all likelihood. You're going to have to win a lot of these 2-1, 3-2 type of games that are pretty much symbolic of high level softball.
Yeah, game 1 felt like most of the SEC losses we saw during the regular season when they did lose SEC games. It was tight. It came down to 1 play, and Alabama made an error and lost the game by 1 run. It felt like, gosh, that's kind of what we've seen all season long. But the reminder was they were this close. When you're this close, it doesn't take much to get over the hump. And that's what game 2 and game 3 were. Getting over the hump, getting the hit when it mattered, stellar pitching, really good defense, which hasn't been there all the time all year. But game 1 was more frustration. And I thought the whole series was representative of the whole season, really. I mean, gosh, this team has its struggles. They don't always hit the ball. They sometimes make errors, but you know what? They're pretty good because they're in every game. Doesn't matter the competition. Doesn't matter that it's Pickens on the mound or Gottschall on the mound. Doesn't matter. They're in the game. They can play with anyone. They just don't always get the hit. And in game 2 and game 3, they did. And in the World Series in Oklahoma City, it's going to come down to the same thing. Will they get the big hit at the right time? I think they're going to play very competitive games. I'll be shocked if they're just simply outclassed by anyone in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, resilient has been this team. Hasn't always been pretty. So even after that disheartening game 1 loss in Knoxville, you didn't think this team was just going to get rolled in game 2. Instead, they hang in there for the equivalent. That was really a 4-game super when you think about 14 innings in game 2. So there the Alabama Crimson Tide goes. And game 1 coming up, going to take on the UCLA Bruins, the 6th seed. You know, at this point, you've gone to Knoxville and taken out the 3 seed. UCLA historically really, I would say, unmatched as a traditional power in the sport of softball. Arizona going back certainly can stake a claim to a lot of that as well, coming from the old Pac-12 as we refer to it now. But look, Lisa Fernandez, she's a coach at UCLA, but you don't have to worry about her pitching. You don't have to worry about her hitting in this game 1 matchup. If you're Murph's team, you probably feel like you're playing with some house money. And again, you're good enough to advance in this tournament.
Yeah, I think the UCLA game is winnable. At the same time, Alabama's an underdog. Alabama's the lowest seed. I think in the 18 College World Series, Alabama had the lowest seed going into the NCAA championships. So I can see that Alabama's an underdog, but the games feel winnable because I think playing UCLA on a neutral field is less daunting than playing Tennessee and Knoxville. And this team has a little bit of a different feel to it than last year. Last year, I mean, I'm not saying I predicted 0-2, but 2 and out sort of kind of felt like what would very likely to happen in the World Series last year. I don't feel that way about this team. I don't know how many games they'll win. I don't know if they'll get to the final or win the whole thing. I don't rule anything out or in with this group. I do think it's going to be competitive, tight games, and they're capable of beating anyone, even Oklahoma. I think they can beat them. Why? Caleb Beaver and Jocelyn Brisky are probably going to give you a chance to win. I think the path to wins, though, Travis, the path is probably 2-1, 3-2 type games, and you've got to play good defense on those games. But it's not like Alabama's not capable of doing those things. They're highly capable. They just have to put it all together and get the key hit late in the game to win it.
Yep. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Hey, let's shift some gears and let's talk some Alabama baseball. As Rob Vaughn, his first team with the Crimson Tide, headed to Tallahassee. That's a regional Alabama's familiar with, going back to the past logistically and those type of things. It's always made a lot of sense regionally for Alabama baseball in years in which Tallahassee was a host site to perhaps as a 2 seed head that way. And that'll be the case this time as well. You know, we talked about this going into the SEC tournament and into the SEC tournament after Alabama went 1 and out in Hoover after that loss to South Carolina. Then you watch some of your fellow 13 and 17 teams in SEC play move deep into the tournament. Maybe had to sweat a little bit, I guess, based on how the seeding played out and where Alabama fell in that. It wasn't as much of a sweat as it was for, say, Florida, getting in as a 3 seed, I believe, in Stillwater. But it turns out that a record 11 SEC teams, Jimmy, make the NCAA tournament field. With that, what do you feel like the ceiling is for this UA team as it moves into regional play down in Tally?
Yeah, the opposite problem that softball has. I think, pitching with the baseball team is going to, the team will go as far as the pitching allows. I do think that several of the pitchers are capable of good performances. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Alabama win a game or 2 in this regional that maybe not everyone expects to see. Winning the regional would not surprise me based on where they were sent and who they're playing against. I wouldn't be surprised to see Alabama win a regional, but I do think this team, to be honest, does have sort of a low ceiling because of the pitching and the depth of pitching. And when you don't get a good start and the bullpen's got to pitch 5 or 6 innings or 7 innings, I'm not going to be very confident, to be honest. I think it's just about quality starts and getting to AD, getting to Alton Davis at the end of games. You're going to feel good about that. But if you got to take the starter out too early and use several arms, that just hasn't been a good recipe for this team. I do think it's incredible. They're going back to back now for NCAA tournaments. First time since 2013, 2014. They've been in back-to-back NCAAs. So regardless of what happens in this tournament, this is an ascending program that's getting better. And that's a great sign in a year 1 with Rob Vaughn and in a sport where you can change out the roster, basically almost the whole roster year to year with the transfer portal. I think great things are happening for Alabama baseball. I'm not convinced that this team's going to make a big run in the NCAA championships just simply because of the lack of pitching depth, in part due to injury. It's not even their fault. But pitching depth is probably going to catch up to them at some point. But I don't rule out a big win or two in the regional because they're very capable. Their bats are outstanding, and they could simply hammer folks and win games 12-10.
That's a ballpark that you can score some runs in down there too at Dick Howser Stadium. Ball can get out of there, especially with those left-handed bats that Alabama runs up there, that porch type of setup with it's not the green monster in Tallahassee, but it's something similar out there. It has in the past anyway. And, Alabama opens with a Big 12 opponent. I'm struggling to get used to saying that with UCF,
right?
But that is in fact the case. And, this is a UCF team that went 3-2 against a good Oklahoma State team this season, team that's hosting a regional coming up this weekend out in Stillwater. This is a UCF team that beat Florida on the road. One of the problems Florida had in terms of its NCAA resume was some of these midweek issues that they had. And UCF was a part of that. UCF with a series win over K-State as well this season. So when you talk about the Golden Knights and the challenges here, sure. Boy, if you're Alabama, getting the win, obviously, Friday at 5 Central, that's scheduled first pitch for this one. That's the goal, obviously.
Right.
But if you could eat up some innings with a quality start and then head into and stay in that winner's bracket for as long as possible in that scenario, I'm with you. I think the bats for Alabama are capable. And then you can't think this far ahead, but you're going to do this because you notice the regionals and how they're sort of paired from a seating perspective. If you do somehow get out of Tallahassee, it might be it might not be a bad situation for you in a super type of scenario.
Well, you got to get good starts. I mean, and the thing is, they're all capable. Greg Ferrone, Ben Hess, even the freshman, Zane Adams, any of the three, Travis, are capable of going out there and putting up zeros for 6 or 7 innings. We've seen them all do it. It's a matter of, can they string it together? Can they string together a few starts? Because you don't have to pitch great the entire regional to win the regional, but you do have to pitch great in a couple games. There has to be a couple games where your starter gets into the 6th or 7th inning, putting up a lot of zeros or maybe just 1 or 2 runs. And then there's going to have to be the couple of games where you have to score 10 to win the game. And Alabama is so capable of doing both. That's why I don't rule anything out, including what might happen in a super regional, because they've done these sort of things before. They've done it against the best competition in the sport in the SEC, so they can certainly do it in the NCAAs. But ultimately, to be honest, in terms of like, what do I think is going to happen? I think ultimately the lack of pitching depth is going to end things.
Speaking of pitching rotation, after this very solid start from Jimmy Stein, we're going to be joined also here by the closer. There he is, Charlie Potter. And I think he's awake. I mean, this is still a little early for Charlie, but man, taking one for the team on a Wednesday. There he is. Charlie, how you doing this morning?
I'm good, guys. I'm awake. That's all that matters.
Hey, I went to a Dave Matthews show last night. If I can be here early, anybody can.
I'll say this. I went to Alicia and I went to NoCon in Nashville over the weekend, and we were the bright individuals that decided to drive back from Nashville after the show. So if it had been the day after that, y'all would have been doing this as a duo.
See, that's one of those things. I've done it too, where when you're 30, you're 30-ish at that point, and you try that type of thing, you realize you're not 20 anymore.
Yeah.
That's one of those hallmark moments when you're like, yeah, we're going to have to start doing the hotel thing on those trips.
Well, I mean, I'm a night owl. I don't know. We stopped somewhere, got some caffeine, and
load up.
Then somebody in the passenger seat took a nap while I drove the rest of the way home.
There you go. That'll work. That'll absolutely work. And we know what time of year it is, Charlie. We've been talking some Alabama softball, some Alabama baseball. It's always nice, isn't it, when you have those two, one or two, and to have both kind of carry you perhaps into the month of June, get you closer to the start of another football season. I think, though, there's folks that probably look at football as a nice way to get them closer to softball season with the support that Murph has for that program these days. But, what we're also seeing with SEC spring meetings, it is talking season for football, guys. Kalen DeBoer addressed the media from Destin on Tuesday. Pretty innocuous comments. A lot of talk about the revenue sharing scenario that could be coming to college athletics, how that could impact walk-ons and roster sizes once and if that takes effect. Charlie, what was your biggest takeaway maybe from what we heard from Kalen down there on the white sand beaches on Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, he was behind the lectern for about 20 minutes, and he got a lot of those roster questions. I saw a lot of comments about that in the thread on the BOL Roundtable, just about the amount of those that there were. I think there were 5 or more. But like you said, it's a hot topic, and for Kalen DeBoer, he's going into his first SEC spring meetings. It's not his first meetings with these other SEC coaches. That's happened, previously before. This event started, but they were pretty clear cut. He obviously isn't someone that comes out with a huge stance, kind of like Nick Saban. And even Nick Saban, talked about a lot of things about we'll see how things go in the meetings and things like that. But I think for Kalen DeBoer, a lot of kind of different questions around the horn. He got asked about Nick Saban. He got asked about, again, the roster, just a ton. And then he got asked about just the team in general. And you can tell he's kind of talked about this a lot, whether it was in various interviews and things like that. He likes what he's seen from the team in this time off. We've kind of highlighted it a lot on the show, on the site, whether it's the guys going down to Tampa. We've seen offensive linemen do some work in Texas. Guys are all over the place doing a lot of work, and I think they're very pleased with what they've seen. The guys are back on campus now. They're starting to go through workouts back with David Ballou. But I think that he kind of sees a hunger in this team. He mentioned that Link mentality, and whether they want to prove people right, prove people wrong. The leadership committees kind of come together and made sure the mindset of the team is in the right spot. So, yeah, you're going to have a lot of the conference and national jargon that goes on in these things. But he got a team related question in there. My ears always kind of perk up just to see what he thinks of what the team's doing going into summer workouts, and I think Kalen DeBoer is pretty pleased with those guys.
Yeah, if you're an Alabama fan, you like that he kind of didn't want to be in Destin because everything was really getting cranked up back in Tuscaloosa,
right?
From a team perspective. But Charlie hit on this, Jimmy. Kalen, he's like a lot of coaches. He doesn't really come at you with hard and definitive statements like a Nick Saban. There's a reason why there's a lot of folks out there that would love to see Nick Saban in a commissioner type role for college football. Kalen's more like he's asked about 8 or 9 SEC games. Well, give us 8 or 9. I mean, you know what I mean? He's a football coach, and he's going to adapt and adjust as needed. And also, even with his resume, he's still a new guy, in that room, even as the head coach at Alabama. And you're not just the new guy, you're the new guy after Nick Saban. His personality is more of, it seems, kind of just ease into the room, get a feel for the lay of the land, and then maybe insert himself where he sees his spots being.
Yeah, it's an adjustment even for Alabama fans, because for so long Alabama's fans have been coached by the president of college football, and it seemed like whenever Coach Saban would be present with national media, and there's national media down in Destin, it's not just the local guys or SEC guys. This is the national group. And whenever that would happen, Nick Saban would always be asked basically, hey, could you give us a State of the Union speech? Give us what is the state of college football? And everyone sits with rapt attention and writes down every word. Kalen DeBoer is just so not that guy. I think he's comfortable handing that role off to someone like Kirby Smart. Hey, you're the guy that's won multiple national championships. You do that, because right now I would like to coach my football team. And as Charlie said, he did make reference to, hey, they're getting up started back in Tuscaloosa. I sort of feel like I need to be back there because the whole team outside of the Canadian defensive lineman, the whole team is on campus and working out. And And there's a great Ryan Williams first day of class picture. And, Ryan, I think DeBoer would love to be back here, frankly. I think Saban was so comfortable in the spotlight, the media spotlight, but I think DeBoer is most comfortable coaching his football team. And that's great.
Yeah, that's what you want if you're an Alabama fan, first and foremost, obviously. JT83 here in the show chat. Question for you guys. Have you all noticed that even with the increased player media availability, there's a lot less talking from the players? Last season, I thought they talked a little too much preseason. Charlie, it's still early too, right? I mean, a lot of what we heard, as I recall it, was probably more around the time of the SEC media days and not SEC spring meetings, or even going back to the spring. Maybe I got that a little bit cluttered up in this rapidly aging mind of mine. What do you think about that, Charlie?
I think probably what they're referring to is the confidence that the offensive line had in the spring. JC Latham, Tyler Booker, those guys didn't really shy away from what they wanted to achieve. And I know we did a feature on BOL of them working with the guy that trains with Aaron Donald with the knives. They did a lot of things and said they had a lot of big hopes, expectations, goals. And they didn't really achieve that with the amount of sacks they gave up and things like that. So, I think it's, as a reporter, as someone whose ears perk up when quotes are said, especially money quotes, I'm fine with these guys talking, especially when it comes from a place of confidence within themselves. But, when you go back to the spring, we did get a ton of players. They came through quite a bit. And the season will be a little different. I think probably only Tuesdays is when we'll hear from players, but we'll hear from a bunch of them. I think that, there's going to be kind of what we saw in the spring. It's not just your usual guys. If there'll be guys that play a little that they're able to talk. I don't think true freshmen are going to talk as much, but they might not be as off limits as they were with Nick Saban. So I think that, yeah, you can tell with Kalen DeBoer, the amount of interviews that he does, he's fine with letting his guys talk, whether it's coaches, whether it's players. But, I think he wants them to keep that same confidence that they've had. And while I don't know if we'll have any, just bombastic statements, we'll see what happens in Dallas for SEC Media Days. But I think these guys have kind of put their head down and gotten to work, but they still have lofty expectations for themselves and for the program.
Guys, I wanted to talk to you both about the strong finish to the athletic year at Alabama and perhaps the likelihood for the ability to sustain what we've seen from three programs in particular. But yeah, when you look at this calendar year, college football playoff, Final Four, first ever for men's basketball at Alabama. Women's College World Series berth now, once again, for Patrick Murphy and his team. Gymnastics made the semifinals of the NCAA championships. Philip Planishik wins the NCAA men's individual tennis championship here in the last couple of weeks. So a really, really strong run through the end of this calendar year. But, with that, when we talk about football and we talk about men's basketball, and we talk about even softball, which of those programs do you believe, and we'll start with you, Jimmy, is most likely to be able to sustain that into 2024 and through 2025, the next calendar year of those programs most likely to sustain and achieve at the level they have this year?
I'm optimistic about all of it, frankly. I'm still buying stock in Patrick Murphy and certainly Nate Oates, but my answer is football, just simply because it all starts and ends there. And I think the team will be preseason top 5-ish. And in the past, if you started out preseason top 5, you could say, "Gosh, the media doesn't have Alabama in the 4-team college football playoff." Now you start out in the top 5, and it's like, wow. The media has Alabama hosting a first-round college football playoff game. So I think with the expanded playoff field, with Alabama returning what they return, quarterbacks back, so many star players are back, what they added in the portal, I fully expect an Alabama football team to be in the college football playoff and making a run at the championship. And the basketball and softball I certainly believe in, but there's a little randomness to basketball. There's some randomness there. You could lose to a 15 seed in round one, and you wouldn't be the first to do that.
It's 12-team playoff, as we know, coming in college football playoff in college football. So Charlie is just making the college football playoff a true sign of sustaining when it was 4 teams the previous year, or do you need to make it, in your opinion, maybe the semifinals to make that even up? Going to be a tougher road. Easier to make the field, but to win it all, it's going to be tougher, I guess.
Yeah, just kind of like what Jimmy said with basketball. You add more teams to the pot, and it's tougher to come out on top. But I think that it's a tough road from a scheduling standpoint for Alabama too, because they've got some tests on the schedule, and I think it's very achievable for them to get to the college football playoff, especially with the expanded field. But let's see what happens when they get out of that stretch of Tennessee, Missouri, and LSU. Georgia's going to be a tough home game, as everybody expects. But I think we'll learn a lot about this team in that 3-game stretch. But if they come out of that in good shape, I think they have a good chance to kind of make a run and play into an extended season, like Kalen DeBoer was talking about. In Destin, talking about just the player availability and switching to morning practices and things like that. So I think it's certainly something they can do, something that's attainable. But for the broad question that you posed before, I kind of like men's basketball with what they've been able to do via the portal, and I don't think even I should sleep on this high school class coming in with 4 top 50 players, if not borderline top 50 players. So it's tough to get to the Final Four. Alabama's only done it once. That kind of proves the difficulty there. But with what they've been able to do, and if they get good news today from an NBA draft decision standpoint, then I like their chances even more.
Yeah, we'll get into some of that as it relates to the impactful newcomer segment in just a second. Yeah, I mean, the expectation is going to be for football and basketball to reach the Final Four. Probably, in my opinion, still tougher in basketball to do it, and more random variables that come into play, like draw and those type of things with hoops. More uncertainty, things it seems like that are outside of your control in basketball than even with a 12-team football format. But Andrew King here in the show chat says it's basketball. They will be preseason number 1. No, well, they could be, but there's a difference between preseason expectations and what actually happens, as we know. So it'd be a lot of fun, though, to watch it play out. Guys, one more thing before we let Jimmy out of here on this Wednesday morning. Wanted to talk to you guys about impactful newcomers as it relates to football and the men's basketball program, because we pretty much have those guys on campus now, the summer enrollees. And this can be a transfer. It can be a high school guy. But between football, Jimmy, and basketball, men's basketball, pick one impactful newcomer. Got some good ones you can choose from here, too. I mean, Ryan Williams, Darian Reed, high school guys, and then the transfers as well. I'm going to disqualify Caden Proctor.
Okay.
So before you're going to be funny and cute and clever, Charlie, taking Caden out of the mix. So, Jimmy, go ahead and get us going.
Strongly considered Caden and some football guys.
I know you guys.
I'm going to go basketball here, though, and go Cliff Amore, just in the sense that I don't anticipate Cliff Amore being a 20 and 15 guy every night. I don't, but that's not, to me, that's not his true impact on the program. To me, his true impact is having his actual presence on the floor changes how Alabama plays defense. It puts Grant Nelson in a better spot to be a more productive player. And I think just changes the entire look of the team. It's what Alabama was missing all last season, could have been the final piece in what might have been a championship team. And hey, just because you're not good enough to beat UConn last year doesn't mean that you weren't good enough to be a championship team. But you add a Cliff Amore to what they had last year. I think he's the most impactful newcomer, basketball or football.
Charlie, who you got?
Yeah, I was going to go with Cliff too, just because, like Jimmy said, he was the missing link. And if you have that rim protector, you never know what happens in that tournament. So I think that there's a lot of basketball players you can name because they just signed 5 this week. Heck, if Mark Sears stays in the draft, Aiden Holloway becomes huge for this men's basketball program. So that's kind of a hypothetical. But no, I agree with Jimmy with going with Cliff there. I think though, if I were to have to choose someone else, if he's off the board, it's my surprise, you guys, but I like Graham Nicholson, the kicker.
Man, why did you see? I said one, Charlie.
Well, I was going away from what Jimmy said.
Also, Travis's pick.
Yeah, I know Travis loves the kickers. I won't talk about him much.
Sad trombone here. Yeah. No, go ahead. I like the pick, Charlie. I do. Go ahead.
He's a guy that's going to step in and play immediately, and that's obviously a position that wasn't something that they mentioned like offensive line or defensive back, but big shoes to fill. And for a guy that was productive at Miami of Ohio, won the Lou Groza, can really ask for a better replacement for Will Riker.
Yeah, our pal Jimmy here, he'll get this one. You know, you don't really think about an attorney until you need an attorney, right? You don't really think about a kicker until you really need a kicker. And Alabama didn't just get a kicker. I mean, they got the Groza Award winner. So I agree with Charlie. And he kind of, I knew he was going to do it.
Hey, Jimmy took my pick, so I had to take yours.
We're too wired in similar ways. Well, Jimmy, we appreciate you taking the time with us on this Wednesday morning. Look forward to your insight and everything that goes with that with us right there on the roundtable at BamaOnLine.com. Jimmy, of course, a big part of our YouTube channel here. So if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button right now. Give us a like as well if you don't mind. Turn on those notifications. You'll get all of this YouTube content as it drops on the YouTube home for BOL. Jimmy, we'll do it again soon.
Hey, looking forward to it. Have a good week, guys.
Thanks, Jimmy. There goes Jimmy. And then there were 2. Chuck and TR. There we go. And we've got some questions for you, Charlie Potter, because as we know, you've been doing some great stuff for us. What we'll do is we'll start with it's tight end week.
Yes, it is, baby.
BamaOnLine.com. And it's really an interesting position because I think you could make an argument in my years of doing this. Maybe you've seen this too, but it just feels like beyond the quarterback position, every year in the offseason or in the preseason, I may get asked more about tight ends than any other position. There's this fascination with the tight end position and can we get more passes, get more receptions, more production? Because I don't know if football fans, whether novice or expert level, love anything more than a beautifully thrown seam pass down the middle of the field to a tight end. So let's get into some tight ends, Charlie. And of course, you got us covered right there at BamaOnline.com throughout the week. We'll have our one bold prediction from each of our BOL staff members as it relates to that spot. But coaching change in offense. So I'm going to ask you right out the gate, based on what we've seen to this point and heard, usage rate for the tight end position under Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan as compared to the previous regime, where are you kind of seeing that as we head into the summer months?
It's going to be interesting because I think there could be an uptick. I know, like you said, Alabama fans want to know about the tight ends and how they're used. But you look at last year, what Washington did. They had 3 tight ends with more than 100 yards. Alabama had 2. They had 2 guys with double-digit receptions. Alabama had 1, and one of those guys is no longer on the roster with Amari Niblack moving on to Texas. So I think with what you have back and what you brought in, CJ Dupree kind of makes sense for a potential tight end 1 just because he started the most games for Alabama at the position last year. I think he's someone that now has a year in the program. He stuck around. That's a big deal. Robbie Utes is kind of a guy that moves all over the field, does a lot of things. Heck, he even plays some fullback. But I think adding a guy like Josh Cuevas who knows this offense and who kind of seemed, I don't know Washington's depth chart and where things stand, but he kind of seemed like he might have been in line to be their number 1 guy at the position with what they lost this offseason. He's a guy that before his time in Washington, he's a guy that produced over 600 yards in a season at Cal Poly. So I think I like their options too. They have some guys at the top of the pecking order, even a guy like Danny Lewis you can probably throw in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from a receiving core standpoint, how they get the backs involved in the passing game. And then you got to also take into account Jalen Milroe's legs. So there's some variables at play for these tight ends. But no, I think you look at what they were able to do last year. I mean, Amari Niblack was a guy that Nick Saban and the staff talked about as a mismatch player. Well, the guy caught 20 passes. So that's not exactly O.J. Howard or Herb Smith production. I don't think we'll see that from maybe an individual on this team, but I think as a collective group, Dupree and Cuevas and maybe even Robbie Utes getting a little bit more or a few more targets, I think they can certainly increase the output that this group had last year.
Yeah, you think about the numbers that they've had, and they lose Amari Niblack to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, Miles Kitselman looks like he's going to be a rotational guy for Tennessee this fall at the tight end position. And then you bring in Cuevas. You continue to develop Danny Lewis. You think about, again, CJ Dupree back for another year is big. I wonder how Robbie Utes fits into all of this because he's kind of a hybrid player, I would say. I would say this too, though, that it seems like when it comes to maximizing whatever he can get out of an offensive player, especially, Kalen DeBoer has a history of that. So you don't discount the possibility that Robbie's going to be a big part of things as well. And also, even in a pretty wide receiver centric offense at Washington last year, the tight end was still a player in that offense in the passing game. So when I think about this Alabama offense, this DeBoer offense, yeah, I think Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams and Kobe Prentice and Kendrick Law and the guys that they have, they're gonna be fine at wide receiver. But if the tight end had a place at Washington last year,
yeah,
I got to think they are going to have a place in this offense, and that's with the understanding. I don't think like Washington a year ago, Alabama's going to throw the ball 500 plus times or attempt 500 plus passes, but relative to when they throw it, you're going to have to defend the tight end.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't think we'll see 5,000 passing yards from this offense this fall, but there aren't those three dogs that Washington had on their team last year, 3 top 100 picks. So a guy like Jack Westover is a guy that saw plenty of action for Washington. Mm-hmm. And you see, we've talked about it, that trip to Tampa, that pisses some people off. I'm not sure why, but you had CJ Dupree down there with Jalen Milroe. Danny Lewis made that trip last year, and he seemed like a guy that was poised to take on maybe a bigger role, and that kind of fizzled out as the season started. But CJ is a guy that started 11 games last year. He played in every game. He had double-digit catches. I think you could easily see a guy like CJ Dupree double what he did last year. And if he did that, he'd have more receptions than Amari Niblack. And that's not that inconceivable in this offense. I think I'll be interested to see just what or how Jalen Milroe maybe changes a little bit, because you still have the same quarterback from last year. Does he get the tight end more involved? I think it's certainly possible because you have to replace so much at the wide receiver position. And, he has a rapport with these guys now. And I think Josh Cuevas coming in, receiving tight end, I would be fascinated to see if this room still had Caleb Odom, how differently we're talking about them.
That's where I was going next. Usage for Caleb Odom and how, while it may not technically be a tight end, but how you have to defend this passing game. If they go 4 wide receivers, but one of those is Caleb Odom,
you could, what you were talking about earlier, that fascination and that kind of people love to see that seam route, but Caleb Odom in the slot, that's a mismatched player on a guy that's at the star position or the husky position. Mm-hmm. He's aggressive off the line. He's aggressive at the point of attack. He's a guy that I can go up and get those 50-50 balls. He's a big body, but he also runs like a deer. So I think that'll be interesting. And you can almost lump him in with this group by default, but that feels cheating a little bit. I still think with Dupree and Cuevas alone, I think those are 2 really good receiving options. And Robbie Utes is a guy, he has 8 career receptions, but he's been praised quite a bit just for his hands. I think he's a guy that they feel is reliable, and he just hasn't been given that much of an opportunity. I don't know if we'll see his uptake just triple from what it's been throughout his entire career, but he's someone, it'll be interesting to see how they use him. I think just the usage in general, where guys line up and how many of these guys they get on the field will be fascinating. But I think that there's a place for these guys in the passing game. And I think that there's multiple places and multiple roles that they can fill, whether it is from just blocking, but also getting involved in the aerial attack.
Yeah, I think that there'll be more stuff maybe by design to the tight end too, rather
Yeah.
than depending on Jalen to get down to the tight end and his progressions. There may be more of no, this against this look. This is where we're going first,
Yeah.
actually, instead of it being more of check down by nature. And we haven't even talked about the run game, but obviously I think it's going to surprise folks how much Alabama comes out and leans on that. I think a lot of folks on the outside are going to think, well, I want to see Michael Penix and I want to see Jalen Polk and I want to see Dunzy and those type of guys. And it may ultimately prove to be more of that as the season goes on, but especially early, boy, you're going to have to be good in that run game at the tight end position as well. Hey, Charlie, you had for us at BamaOnLine.com here in the last day or so, a Preston Murphy exclusive. What a run that was with the Amori recruitment, the transfer from Rutgers, Big Clifford, and the social media interaction by Preston Murphy, the Alabama men's basketball assistant coach, who has been extremely impactful in a very short period of time since joining Nate Oates' staff. Just talk to me about this guy. Is he energetic? Is he juice? Part of me feels like you have to have at least some of that in that role. What kind of guy are we talking about here?
I've talked to Preston at length, I guess, a couple of times. I talked to him out in Phoenix, and then now for this exclusive here in Tuscaloosa. And you would think that he's just like an energetic guy because he's a monster on the recruiting trail. But he's super chill. He's super soft spoken. He's thoughtful with his responses. Bringing up the Clifford the Big Red Dog tweets, he got a laugh out of that. And his real thing, it was funny because like you could tell he had kind of the PR statement, and then he's like, wait a minute, this is what actually happened. And it was that he saw people questioning if he was even on campus and things like that.
Right.
And so he just said, you know what, I'm going to tweet about this guy every day until he makes a decision. And so now we've seen some even more tweets from Preston, and he's kind of hinted at, what these draft decisions are coming up for Mark Sears and Jaron Stevenson and getting people excited. But now he knows what he's doing. And from a recruiting standpoint, he kind of talked about it, how the Final Four is huge because everybody that you're recruiting is watching college basketball. They're college basketball fans. To be playing on that last weekend is a big deal, but you have to play catch up because you're game planning. And I know they were able to get Houston Millett out of the portal because he entered when his head coach was dismissed at Pepperdine. But then you have to go out and you add guys like Chris Youngblood and Aiden Holloway. And obviously, Cliff's a big deal. You get LeBaron Filan from the high school ranks. It's a squad that Preston Murphy had a big hand in putting together. And I think they're really pleased with what they were able to do. And really the big thing for him was I asked about like recruiting with Nate Oates because this is really his first full offseason doing that. I know he came in last year, but Nate Oates was kind of that Will Smith meme from the Fresh Prince, just standing alone in the living room for a long time. And he talked about how Nate Oates has a very analytical mind. That's not a surprise given his background as a former math teacher, but he knows what works for him. The thing about Preston Murphy and his approach as a recruiter is it's all about fit. Now he's great at developing relationships and everything like that, but he also has an eye for what Nate Oates wants and what fits this system. And that's not every player, even some of these top players in the country. So, there's kind of a vetting process. Nate's very particular about what he wants and what he's looking for. And for Preston, it's his job then to help him go out and find it. And I think they did a really good job of that.
So in that way, maybe kind of like what Antoine Petway was.
Yeah.
Before him, because Pet had that kind of demeanor too, not really in front, but definitely took care of business, no doubt about it. Hey, great stuff, by the way. If you haven't checked out that piece right there with us at BamaOnline.com, I'm sure you have by now, but it is there at BOL Charlie's one-on-one with Preston Murphy, the Alabama men's basketball assistant coach. And as we wrap up with you, Charlie, off-season work for football pretty much goes in-house. It was still kind of a busy May because I know you were keeping tabs with guys as they were working out elsewhere. You talked about the Tampa Tide as we kind of come to know it during the month of May. That we always think that May is going to be a bit of a downtime, but these guys know they got to keep it going. And you think about the summer work now as stuff moves back to Tuscaloosa and you get all these newcomers with your returning roster, and it feels more like you've got your team together for the first time for 2024. I would guess having a veteran, a returning starter at the quarterback position helps. You do have a new regime. So even from that perspective, having experience in the quarterback room in general, because it's not just Jalen. Ty Simpson's been around the program a couple of years now. And then Austin Mack, because he's experienced this before under Kalen DeBoer, can be beneficial. He's probably the fourth guy right now in that pecking order, third, fourth, somewhere in that neighborhood. But that's got to help too, I would think, in getting this stuff on campus, getting it going, understanding support staffers now are so involved, strength and conditioning, sports science people. But that's where we're at on the calendar, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have workouts with David Blue, but they're going to get into some 7-on-7 stuff as the summer progresses. And I think you made a good point about those quarterbacks, because having that experience both on campus and in the college game, but also in this offense, I think it could be a smoother summer than someone would expect with a first-year head coach. And so, having your starter back in Jalen Milroe, having a guy like Ty Simpson, who's had a great offseason, talking about that trip to Tampa, when they would do stuff on their own, kind of after their day was over, and Ty would jump in there and work with the offense. The guys there were really impressed with him and said there wasn't a difference other than the voice behind the pseudo center. So I think that having all of that is huge because this offense is still, you're still trying to develop some chemistry with some guys. You've got guys at wide receiver, tight end, running back stepping up into new roles, and it's not going to be full-fledged football practice. But these guys have put in a lot of work this offseason, going into these workouts before they do stuff on campus that's more regimented and getting ready for the season. But the big thing, going back to kind of the roster size topic, is you don't really want those guys to be overworked. A lot of these guys, the list, it'd be easier to make a list of guys that didn't do anything in May than to put together the full list of what guys were where, because everybody was doing something. But the big thing is just like, don't overwork yourself. You got to stay fresh for the season, but this work's important. And I think a lot of guys, took that to heart. We didn't see it every day, but I think that they're in a good spot and they like the mindset of the team going into these summer workouts, and having that experience at the quarterback's position when you start to get on the field and put some cleats on, it's huge, it's invaluable.
Yeah, I would think there's a balance that you want to achieve if you're Kalen DeBoer in this summer work. It isn't like it was 20 years ago when Brody Croyle had to get the receivers all together, get everybody together to throw and do the voluntary work. There are support staffers now that have interaction during this time of year to go along with the sports science people. But also, though, you want your players to really take ownership right now.
Yeah.
It is an opportunity. Yes, you want to have your people involved with your players as much as you possibly can. Same time, again, good opportunity from a dynamics, a chemistry perspective to have Jalen Milroe further cement his status and younger players to step forward in roles of leadership. Newcomers, it's a great opportunity for guys like Jeremy Bernard, Parker Brailsford, Josh Cuevas, especially on the offensive side of the ball, to help run those workouts without leaning too much on support staff and those kind of folks. So the intangibles, I guess you could say, intangible season, we might be able to call these next couple of months.
Yeah, no doubt. And really, it's something that it was new to hear. Going back to spring meetings yesterday with Kalen DeBoer, he talked about being in a group chat or in a thread, maybe on a texting app, with the leadership council and how they were adamant about getting together, about having the right mindset. We kind of talked about that earlier. But that ownership and that accountability is something that this team has, because you have guys like Milroe coming back. You have Tyler Booker. Malachi Moore is huge in that department as a returning team captain. Deontay Long, you can go down the list. Tim Keenan, some of those guys have really stepped into leadership roles. And I think some of the new guys have as well. I think Jeremy Bernard could be a leader of that wide receiver room alongside guys like Kendrick Law and others. But I think that the leadership council kind of has now that it wasn't like they had their blinders on before, but now they have their blinders on, getting back on campus, and they're ready to roll, and they're making sure that the guys behind them that are working alongside them are going to be in that same boat. And I think for Kalen DeBoer going on to year one, having that leadership kind of already there, and the buy-in that they've already got from these players to stick around and to buy into a new coaching staff, to hear that going into some workouts has to be music to his ears.
You would think so. And it's music to our ears and eyes when we hear from this guy, Charlie Potter. Symphonic, I've heard it described, Charlie. In all seriousness, Charlie does a great job for us right there at BamaOnLine.com and right here on the YouTube home for BOL. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Hit the subscribe button. Hit a like for us, too, if you don't mind. Turn on those notifications. You'll get all of this content as it drops on the YouTube home for Bama Online. And, of course, the roundtable right there with us at BamaOnline.com. That's where you're going to learn everything we know as we know it. That's where you're going to get it first. On the roundtable, premium message board right there with us at BamaOnline.com. Tim Watts, Andrew Bone, Charlie Potter, Jimmy Stein, Joseph Hastings, Clint Lamb. I have to be careful. I got to remember all of the staff, but all great people, all do great work with us right there at BamaOnline.com. Hey, Charlie, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for rolling out of the rack a little bit early, and look forward to doing it again soon.
No problem, man. It's always good to catch up with you.
Yep, always a good time with Charlie. There you go. So for Charlie Potter and Jimmy Stein, Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us right here on the YouTube home for BOL. And until next time, so long, everybody.